After a sermon is over, have you ever wanted to make a comment, ask a question, or listen to the preacher say more about a particular idea? If so, this podcast is for you. My name is Wes McAdams, and I'll be sitting down with one of my fellow McDermott Road ministers to discuss comments, questions, and thoughts that have come up after the sermon is over. Welcome to PS, the Post-Sermon Podcast.
Welcome back to the Post-Sermon Podcast. My name's Barrett. I'm one of the ministers at the McDermott Road Church of Christ, and joined, as always, by Wes McAdams, our preaching minister at the same congregation. How are you doing, Wes?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well, man. We're full speed ahead on Christmas break over here. And so if you're watching, maybe recognizing a different background, I'm in my wife's office. I've kicked her out. She's done for the day. So I'm home and trying to enjoy some Christmas break with the boys. They are here and right outside and very loud. So, if you hear screaming in the background, just know that it's Christmas time. Santa's on the way. So we're full speed ahead there, man. But you guys
shout out to your family for letting you have a little bit of time to record the podcast.
Oh, for sure. This was one of the three things I asked for Christmas was some quiet, alone time to record a podcast with my friend.
Nice.
Yeah. So great sermon yesterday, and thank you for taking the time to recap with us and get into the weeds a little bit more on some of that stuff. I thought it was another great addition to the peace and the idea of peace around this time of year, and it was a lot of great stuff. But would you mind recapping quickly for us?
Yeah, so we talked primarily about the shepherds that heard the angelic message that the king had been born, and just how that probably turned their life upside down, how it changed everything forever going through that experience. And then we sort of use that as a way to think about ourselves receiving the good news and how it changes everything for us, and how our lives are different after we hear the good news than they were before. How it has to be different. The good news is so big, so monumental, so huge that it changes everything. And so we applied that idea to the idea of peace, and we said that we experience peace, or we find peace, when we realize that the good news outweighs everything else, that there's a lot of things in our life that we're dealing with, and they're heavy sometimes, but the good news is heavier. The good news about Jesus weighs more than everything else in our life put together.
Yeah, I kept thinking about the song "My God is Bigger Than the Boogeyman." You remember that one?
Yeah, that's good.
It felt
I love it.
I'm sure you listened to that and then derived a lot of your sermon from that, like you tend to do. Get a lot of.
Is that a VeggieTales song?
I was going to say, I think it's VeggieTales.
Yes, the theology of Phil Vischer. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what did you like about yesterday's sermon, and is there anything that you wish you'd said differently or done differently?
There's always a million things that I wish that I had done differently, but I hope that this particular sermon connected to the theme for the year, the idea of we're saved for a purpose, and what purpose are we saved for, and it's peacemaking, and to experience peace. This week probably was less like peacemaking than some of the other lessons that we talked about, but I hope that it still resonates and connects to that idea that we are saved to experience peace, like not just peace with God, but also peace with each other, and an internal peace. And sometimes we sort of save what we think we are saved for the afterlife or the resurrection, and that's all important. That's all really good, but there is a right now, a current, present moment reason for our salvation. And part of that reason for our salvation is so that we can experience peace, so that we can step into and be part of the Messiah's peace. And I think sometimes we don't recognize that. So we're not just not doing and living a certain way. That's been a lot of what we focused on this year, but also just not experiencing all of the emotional, spiritual benefits that are ours for the receiving right now in the present moment, that
Mm.
they're there for us. And so often, myself included, I'm not experiencing those benefits that are mine in Christ Jesus. I have every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places that's mine right now, and so often I'm leaving them on the table. I'm leaving them out of my present reality, my present life. And I hope that we connected it to that you're saved so that you can experience this peace right now. Yes, there's still a lot going on. There's still a lot of brokenness. There's still a lot of burden, but you can begin, not in a perfect way, but you can begin to experience that peace even right now.
I think I would say that I've always struggled with contentment, and being content is how I would have defined like a personal struggle.
Mm,
But in this series and connected to our annual theme, sanctified, purified for a purpose, um, you know, connecting those dots and kind of redefining terms is what's happened for me. You've helped me kind of, okay, maybe it is that I'm not leaning into and experiencing peace and joy. It's not just contentment, it's more than that. It is,
mm,
"Hey, I'm not allowing the Spirit to, produce the fruit of peace in my life." And so I think that's been really helpful to kinda magnify that, and shine a light on that in my own life, and I think it has been for our congregation. So I've loved, I struggle sometimes with, like, end of the year. Okay, he's doing a piece Christmas series for December, and you're like, where are we going with this? And then yesterday was so good. So I would,
mm.
again, encourage you, if you're finding this on YouTube or somewhere else and you haven't listened to it, definitely go back and listen to it, because it's not just like, the shepherds, they heard it. It was very applicable, and, oh, it's Christmas time, shepherds, they were there. I thought it was very, it felt very seasonal, but also was just very, very good.
Yeah, thanks.
Uh, Now we kind of planned to ask this one on purpose because you had some, I thought, some real good lines yesterday, but did you say anything in the sermon you hadn't planned on saying? Probably my favorite question that we ask.
There were a couple of lines that I wanted to be a little bit playful yesterday. I mean, there was a certain degree to which this was it was a heavy subject because we're talking about death and cancer and, things going on in the world and those kind of things and how we can experience peace. But it's also the Sunday before Christmas, and I knew there'd be a lot of kids, and there'd be, we were talking about the birth of Jesus, and I wanted to be a little bit playful. And so, I planned to say a few things that, I used the phrase keep that same energy, which is something I hear my teenage boys say. There was another one. What else did I
The
say?
the
You brought it.
angels told him to chill out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
chill out. Yeah, yeah, chill out. And
yeah,
so I tried to throw in a few of the phrases that my kids, have said and say on a regular basis. But I also said we want to put ourselves in the shoes of the shepherds. And then I stopped and said, well, maybe sandals instead of. So I didn't plan on saying sandals instead of shoes. I thought I would get a laugh, but I felt like, man,
it's
people were
pretty good.
not in the laughing mood yesterday morning, and I started in a pretty heavy way. So it's funny
Yeah,
when you start a sermon in a very heavy way, if you try to lighten the mood and bring in a little bit of levity and make a joke later on, they're like, "Whoa, whoa, hold on,
yeah.
Wes. Like
Like,
you
"Hey,
didn't
just,"
warn us that we were going to be laughing. So we were
yeah,
not prepared for that."
but you just made us recall a lot of traumatic events that
Yes,
changed our life
that's
forever.
true. That's true.
And
Yes.
now you're talking about putting ourselves in their sandals? No, I thought that, well, what's funny to me is that you said the chill out line and keep that same energy line were in your notes,
Yes.
and the sandal joke wasn't in your notes. Came across the exact opposite way. I would have guessed that you wrote the sandals joke, because I was like, "Oh, that's pretty good." And then the keep that same energy, I was like, "He's just riffing up there. He's on one. He's really leaning into the teen audience." But no, I thought all of that was really good. And maybe we'll give some context later to the keep that same energy comment. But as always, we love it when our audience writes in asking questions or leaving thought provoking comments and that sort of thing. And so thank you all for doing that. It really creates more of a dialogue, and we are always appreciative. Kevin Mims wrote in and said, I like the idea that these events changed the lives of those who experienced it forever. I am challenged, though, because of passages in the Bible where these kinds of events are devalued or cast aside, specifically like the crossing of the Red Sea and the Exodus. There are other examples, but I wanted to ask how you would recommend keeping these experiences fresh and as influential as they should be to us and now as they should be.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Thank you, Kevin, for that question. That's so good. I would say on first that just because an experience changes someone doesn't necessarily mean that it completely sanctifies them. It doesn't mean that they are going to be perfect after that experience than they were before. So the people that came through the Red Sea, yes, like Israel still continued to struggle with doubt and with complaining and with arguing and grumbling, and disobedience, and even a desire to go back to Egypt, and idolatry and all of these things. And so, yes, there was still a lot of sanctification. As someone said, it was one thing to get the people out of Egypt. It was another thing to get Egypt out of
Mhm.
the people. Like it took a long time to get Egypt out of the people, to get that disobedience and idolatry and hard-heartedness out of them. But I'm sure that to some degree, they were different people having gone through that experience. You could not have gone through the Exodus experience without being changed. Like I don't know how you could have gone through just the plagues alone and not be a changed person, much less walk through the Red Sea and having the water parted on either side and go
Mhm.
through that. They still were hard-hearted. They still were disobedient. They still were all of those things. But there was a degree to which they were changed. They were transformed. They weren't the same people afterwards that they were before. But to get to the practicality of Kevin's question, this is so important. And this is exactly why God instituted what he did. That's why they have the Passover every year, because every year after that initial Exodus event, they continued to reenact it, to rehearse it, to relive it, so that not just the original generation who left Egypt, but every subsequent generation continued to say, we were slaves in Egypt. We were slaves, and God brought us out. So the next generation, and 10, 20, 30, 40 generations later, they were still supposed to be, anyway, taking the Passover every single year and re-experiencing it. So it was real to them. It was tangible to them. So I forget, how did Kevin phrase that? How do we keep it fresh? I forget
Mhm.
what word he used.
He did.
Fresh.
Yeah. How do we
Yeah.
keeping these experiences fresh and as influential as they should be to us now?
Yeah. Yeah, and another word besides fresh might be real. Like, God uses these real elements, real bread, to eat this Passover bread every single year, real meat, and experience the Passover every single year, every single generation, remembering this is what God has done for us, so that they have that experience. So the experience not just stays fresh or stays real in their imagination, but that they are actually living it out. And then Jesus does the same thing for us, in that the Passover becomes what we call the Lord's Supper. It becomes this communion meal where we literally share the meal that Jesus shared with his apostles, and we remember his body and his blood. Again, not just in our memory, not just a sermon or a message or a song. All of those things are important and helpful in keeping them real, but we reenact the Passover meal. We reenact the
Mm.
Last Supper that Jesus ate with his apostles, and we take the body and the blood of Jesus and we re-experience those things, so that we have the same experience of the good news. Again, a very incarnate experience, a very tangible experience. It becomes real to us, and we keep it real every single week, so that we're supposed to, and I don't know that we always do this, but I think it's the answer to Kevin's question, so that we have this type of shepherd moment, this type of apostle moment, this type of being at the foot of the cross, at being at the empty tomb. We experience those things every single week with one another, by reading the stories, by reading the scriptures, by singing the songs, but also by eating the bread and sharing the cup. Baptism is another one of those moments. Like, we are having our Red Sea moment. We are being buried with Jesus, so that for the rest of our spiritual life, we can think back to our own baptism and say, I was there. I was buried with Jesus. The old self was buried with him, and I was resurrected to live a new life. And so it's really easy for us to look back at the stories in scripture, to look at the experience that the shepherds had, or to look at the experience Mary had, to think about Joseph and his encounter with the angel, or to think about being at the cross or being at the empty tomb and say, how would I have reacted, or would I have stayed faithful after I had those experiences, or I wish I could have those experiences. The truth is, we're supposed to, in our heart, in our mind, but also with our body, supposed to have those experiences on
Yep.
a regular basis so that it becomes just as real for us as it was real for them. For us to think of and see ourselves as being the disciples of Jesus who have shared countless times the supper with Jesus. To say, I wish I could have been there for the Last Supper. You were. You have been. I was there yesterday. I had the bread with Jesus. I shared the cup with Jesus. And we've had these experiences, and we're supposed to think of them that way and experience them that way so that this week we say, okay, I'm not the person I was before. I'm not going to think like I thought before. I'm not going to live like I've lived before, because now I've experienced the good news that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God.
It's fantastic. And at the risk of stepping all over your answer, yeah, I was thinking about while you're talking, like, there's lots of triggers that the Lord has set up for, hey, when you take communion, it should trigger a thought process. It
Yeah.
should trigger a feeling. It should trigger emotions. It should trigger all these different things. And I've, taught a lot of youth group classes, and that was a good go-to lesson of like, hey, you should set up your own little altars and little triggers and little reminders of, hey, when I see, I had like some silly examples, but and they were usually for like, I want to pray and remember my friends that I'm close with, but that live far away. When I eat a bowl of cereal, which is way too often, but my friend Josh, man, he loves cereal. And when I eat cereal, I think of him a lot. And I try to use that as like a trigger for, I'm going to pray for him and pray for his family. And similarly, like I think we should set those up for, and you want to keep those experiences like life changing spiritual experience and, epiphanies, if you will, like moments, keeping them real, like setting up triggers like, hey, I'm going to have a retreat that I do, once a year, and it's going to be an hour-long retreat because, hey,
Mm.
I've got kids and a busy life and that sort of thing. But I'm going to schedule a time where I go and sit and remember and reflect, like, hey, it was in this moment that I decided to follow Jesus, and here's what I felt, and here's what it, sounded like and felt like and smelled like. And, I was out here at church camp, or I was, here at this building or wherever it was, but kind of setting up some of those retreats, setting up those triggers, retelling those stories. That's something that I'm looking forward to as my kids get older, like telling them about my baptism, I think is going to be an important practice for me of kind of vocalizing, like, here's why I decided. And, was it like the best time? I was baptized pretty young, but it's like, hey, I knew this, and here's what I've come to learn since then. And that I think is going to make that kind of a fresh renewal and like, hey, yeah, that is why I made that decision. And there has been a lot of growth and learning since then. And there's
Mm.
been a lot of Egypt being pushed out of me since then. But boy, have I learned a lot. So, yeah, great comment and question from Kevin. And I think that's worth everybody spending some time exploring of like, what am I doing on Sunday through Saturday? What am I doing to remember well these experiences? But yeah, you started with, asking the question, what are some things that have changed your life forever? What are some experiences that changed you forever? And I did immediately go to like some negative experiences.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh man, why would I go there? That was pretty dark. That was a little negative. And then as I had that thought, you said, and maybe you go to something negative, like maybe it's a negative thing. I was like, oh, thanks for bailing me out. That makes me feel a lot better. But um, so I just wanted to ask you, and maybe it's positive or negative, but how did the gospel, become one of those life-changing experiences for you personally?
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking about your own baptism, I think back to my baptism a lot. I was really young when I was baptized, And I think there was a lot of fear involved, more than I wish there was, fear of punishment. And I think that that's a legitimate reason to, at least in the beginning, come to the Lord. And so I think part of it was that, but I think often about something I was praying as I was walking down the aisle to be baptized. I was walking towards the preacher, and again, I was really young. My parents tried to talk me out of it multiple times. They took me to the preacher's house. He tried to talk me out of it, but I was determined. And so they were like, "We're not going to walk up with you. Like, if you want to do it in front of
Wow.
hundreds of people, you're going to walk up by yourself, and you're gonna confess to the preacher, or tell him that
Yeah.
you want to be baptized, and you're going to make your confession to him, and or in front of the whole congregation, and
Yeah.
on your own, without mom and dad there with you." And I was like, okay, absolutely. And so as I'm walking up there, I was thinking in my head, I'm doing this for you, Lord. I'm doing this for you, because I was terrified, of course. And I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this for you. And I told my mom that later, and she kind of corrected me, and I'm glad she did. And I'm glad we had this conversation, because it's made it stick in my mind. And she said, "Well, you weren't really doing it for the Lord. You were doing it for you." The more I thought
Mm.
about that, I thought, you know what? No, I think I was initially right. Like, I was doing it for him. I was doing it to commit myself to him.
Yeah.
I was doing it to surrender myself to him, to say, I'm yours now, Lord. It wasn't just for me. It wasn't just to rescue me from punishment that I deserved. It was I love you, and I'm giving myself to you. And it's that conversation that really has reassured me over the years that there's a lot I didn't know about Jesus. There's a lot I didn't know about baptism, but that was the moment where I turned things over to him. Now, again, just like Kevin brought up, that I was young when I made that decision, and so most of my sinning that I've done in my 42 years, most of my sinning has been done after my baptism, not before it,
Right.
which I hate that that's the case. But that's not to say that my life wasn't totally, completely changed
Mhm.
when I surrendered my life to Jesus, and was baptized, buried with him in baptism. So yes, you still continue to struggle after you've had those experiences, after your life has been turned upside down. But you keep coming back to those moments to say, am I living out this change? Am I being the person that I committed to being? And so you keep coming back to that moment. And even if you revert to the old person afterwards, you are convicted. I'm not living out this transformation. I'm not living this out. And so it continues to transform you. It's not just a one-time transformation where, the light was off and now it's on and it's always on. You keep going back to that moment to say, and I'm sure, like, to bring this to the shepherds out in the field. There were probably moments 10 years later, 15 years later, maybe 20 years later, if they live that long, that they were like, "Ah, I'm really struggling with God. I'm struggling with my faith. I'm struggling with my relationship with Yahweh." And they came back to that moment of being in the field and seeing the glory of the Lord, and being surrounded by the glory of the Lord, and hearing the praise of the angels, and to say, okay, wait, God does keep his promises. The Messiah has been born. And I don't know what's going to become of that little boy that I met all those years ago back there in that manger. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And so they, I'm sure, had moments of doubt, and they had moments of struggle, and they had bad days and good days, but they kept coming back to that experience. And I think that's what baptism should be for all of us. We need to be able to remember our baptism and the commitment that we made, not because we're always going to be perfectly living out that commitment, but we're going to need to recommit ourselves to Jesus over and over and over again, which means we're going to need that moment, that experience, to come back to and draw from over and over again.
I think in one answer, you smashed through 3 of my questions. That was awesome. Yeah. I mean, so let's kind of continue the first one there of like, the shepherds are in the same difficult circumstances, but everything's changed, and their perspective has changed. Can you kind of unpack and talk about how, as ministers and as Christians and disciples of his, like how we help people distinguish between, nothing's changed outwardly or circumstantially, but everything has changed inwardly, and what that
Yeah.
looks like just day to day?
I didn't use this example yesterday, but I've used it a million times in the past. if you found out that you had a wealthy uncle that passed away and left you $1 billion, I mean, let's say an inheritance that is more than you could possibly wrap your mind around, but it's going to be another 10 years before you take possession of that inheritance. That would change your perspective from now until 10 years. I mean, there's going to be bad days. I mean, and you might fall on incredibly hard times. You might be struggling just to put food on the table between now and then. But the way you feel about those bad days has to be changed by the fact that,
Right.
yes, but I'm a billionaire. Like, I have
Yep.
$1 billion coming. I haven't received it yet. It's coming, and I know that it's coming. I have every assurance that it's going to happen. I just have to wait until that happens. And so it's going to change how I deal with these momentary setbacks. And that's how we can interpret the things that happen in the present moment. They're just momentary, they're temporary, they're setbacks. They're bad. They're genuinely bad. And I think Christians have to get better at lament. Like, we have to get better at being able to say with one another, this stinks, and this is not the way that it should be. It shouldn't be this way. We should not live in a world that is full of sin and death and destruction and brokenness and hurt and tears. And someday it won't be this way. Someday death itself will be destroyed and every tear will be wiped away. But we live in this already not yet. We live in this in between where there's a sense in which Jesus has already conquered death, and there's also a sense in which death has not yet been destroyed. And so we still have to deal with it, but we know that it's a defeated enemy. And so that's why in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul can mock death. Where's your sting? You are a loser, death. It's not that we're okay with death or we like it or that it's become something that's not a bad thing. It's still bad. It's still an enemy. We hate it, but we can make fun of it. We can mock it because it has no power over us. And there's days where we know that intellectually, but we don't feel it. And we have to help one another walk through those moments where we say with one another, look, I know how I should feel about this. I don't really feel that way right now, but I know that we win. I know that we're victorious. And so hope, I often say hope is the ability to hold the lament in one hand and the joy in the other. That
Hmm.
we can lament and we can say this is really bad, and have sorrow on the one hand and have joy on the other hand. It's not one or the other. It's not that Christians are just happy all the time. The shepherds certainly wouldn't have been happy every day. They had a horrible life by all measures. They had a horrible life, but they could have joy and they could have hope that transcends the temporary setbacks of life. And we have to be able to have that as well. And so that there's a tension there. There's a paradox there. There's a difficulty there. It's nuanced. It's not just, well, we're all going to be happy now every single day because Jesus has won and Jesus is victorious. Jesus has been born. So don't be sad. It's like, no, no, no. We still need to be able to be sad and say, I
Hmm.
wish this wasn't the case. But someday it won't be the case. And Jesus has conquered even this, whatever the this is.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, let's riff on that then. I mean, you gave a great answer to this kind of idea and this question yesterday. Specific burdens, death. We're all going to lose somebody, or we're going to lose our life at some point. But cancer and headlines and hurtful news, you know, the gospel has to weigh more than those. And we have an opportunity as Christians to minister people and say, I believe the gospel, but my anxiety, my grief, my depression, it still feels heavy, right? And I loved what you said about that and what you were getting to just now, that our response should be, I'm okay. And that I know the gospel outweighs these things, but I am burdened. And I thought, man, that's going in my arsenal for when people ask, hey, how you doing? When we're walking by each other at 200 miles an hour in the hallway, I'm going to be like, I, sir, am burdened, which
Mm.
is sounds negative, but I think that's how we should talk to each other as brothers and sisters. And as you mentioned pre-podcast, right? Like, how do you bear each other's burdens if they're not burdensome, and if you don't tell anybody. And I think I want to start practicing that better, of saying like, man, I do have an incredible hope, an incredible joy, and I know that there are things that have been conquered and will be conquered, and there all things will be made new. At the same time, boy, are my feelings hurt that I live here right now and that I'm going through this and that I'm seeing brothers and sisters across the world struggle with some of the biggest things you could possibly struggle with. But I thought that was an incredible answer that you gave to kind of that idea. And I mean, similarly, like, how does that historical context and that reality of the shepherds living in political oppression and deep poverty, I mean, all of that, how does that shape the way that you think about the announcement of peace for people who are suffering today?
Yeah. Well, Luke, his gospel account it is directed exactly to those kinds of people, the poorest of the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed. It is all about that. Mary's Magnificat, this praise that she offers is all about how God is turning everything upside down. So the people on the top are going to be on the bottom, and the people on the bottom are going to be on the top. And Luke's gospel account specifically targets and looks at and is directed towards those who are hurting the most. And so it makes so much sense that this announcement of the angels would be made not to the priests, not to the Sanhedrin, not to the royalty, but to the shepherds, the lowest of the low in a group of people that was already low and oppressed. There could not have been a group probably more marginalized than these. And so the fact that these are the people that God chose to make the announcement to is incredibly fitting. And so when you think about us today and you think about our world today, and you think about even things like the Beatitudes, blessed are those who mourn. You can't have your tears wiped away by God unless you have tears to begin with. You can't
Mm.
have, like you said, you can't have your burdens borne by God, carried by God, unless you have burdens to begin with. And so this is good news for not for the happy. Jesus doesn't say, blessed are the happy. Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who weep, blessed are the persecuted. Blessed are the hungry and the thirsty. Blessed are the poor. These are the people that Jesus says, congratulations, you get it. It is really hard for the people on the top, for people for whom the status quo is really comfortable. It's really good. It's really great. They like the status quo. It's really hard for them to hear the message, you have to be born again. Like, you have to throw everything away. You have to die to yourself and be born again. You have to start over. People that think I'm doing pretty well in whatever context, I'm
Sure.
doing pretty well, life is going pretty great. It's pretty hard to hear, yeah, you need to start over. But the people on the very bottom, they're desperate for a start over, a redo. And so when Jesus comes and offers rebirth into a new kingdom where everything is upside down, those at the bottom, they hear that. It resonates with them. And that's always true in every context if we preach the gospel the way that the New Testament presents it. And so there's a whole world out there that are not the 1% or the 5% at the top. The 95% of the world are struggling and hurting, and we have good news for them. We have good, and I say them because honestly, most of us are not in that group. Like, we have a pretty comfortable life, all
Yeah.
things considered. And so, but we need to start realizing that, wow, our neighbors our neighbors need to hear this. And in some ways it does alleviate some of their temporary, like, if we come together as the church, as brothers and sisters in Christ, and we share with one another, we take care of one another, we bear one another's burdens, there is a sense in which their life can, even right now in the present, get better, like actually
Yeah.
be better, like food to eat and a roof over their head. We see this in the book of Acts. It really should make those kinds of changes. But there's also a sense in which And we're still gonna struggle, and we're still gonna hurt, and there's still gonna be all of these things until Jesus comes, but it gives us hope that we know that these things are just temporary, and when Jesus comes, everything will be made right. So, the same people who needed to hear this good news message of peace and joy and hope in the 1st century need to hear it in the 21st century, and some of us that maybe are pretty comfortable right now, maybe we need to weep and mourn, and we need to associate with the lower class. We need to humble ourselves and move to a lower seat at the table before we even really get it, before we really understand what the gospel is all about.
That was, one thought I had yesterday is like, man, I fall into a pretty comfortable category. And I think the resolution to that looks like you just said, humbling myself. Well, then, okay, what does that look like? And I think giving and being generous to the point that, okay, well, now I'm in a more stressed out situation because I've given of my time, I've given of my money, I've given of my home and my things. And I'll never forget a, a friend, in Nashville early in ministry. We were talking about a similar idea, and he was like, "Well, so you would invite a homeless man into your house and to stay with you?" And he was just like flabbergasted by the idea. And I was like, yeah, man, I think that's in the book, like, I think it's pretty, and I've just, it's uncomfortable. It's
Mhm.
something that we should wrestle with. And I think it's a good question to keep asking ourselves of like, am I comfortable with someone with less than using my stuff? It's something that we, preach to our little boys of like, hey, you got to share. I think that's a quick way to realign our lives into a more gospel centric view if we're willing to share. Are you willing to share? It's a great question to ask for ourselves,
Or
especially this time of year.
to go back to the idea, the metaphor of if you knew that you were gonna be a billionaire in 10 years,
You should
just
have
like
said that
that
in the
would.
sermon, by the way. That was a great one.
What's that?
I said you should have said that in the sermon, by the way. That was a great one.
I feel like I've said it a million times, and so I feel like I overuse that analogy. But just like it would help us to go through our own hard times, it would, like you said, also make us incredibly generous. Like even if I know, man, I
Yeah,
really don't have $100 to spare right now. I know I'm going to be a billionaire in 10 years. So you know what? It's okay. Like I'll go without a few meals because I know I'm going to have
yeah,
more than I actually need in the future. If we really believe the gospel, like we really believe that the kingdom of God belongs to us, if we really believe that the meek will inherit the earth, that everything that belongs to God belongs to his children, and we are those children, and we will inherit all of the promises of God, that everything that belongs to Jesus by nature and by merit belongs to us by grace. Like, if we believe that that's true, it would make us incredibly generous. Like, who
mhm,
cares? Like, yeah, yeah, use my car, use my house, use my toothbrush. Who cares?
right,
I have everything. Everything belongs to me because I'm a part of God's family. And so we would be incredibly generous, but we hoard things. We hold on to things because we're afraid, we're terrified, and so we become territorial. We lack peace, and that's the whole point. Like
right,
if the good news about Jesus outweighs everything else, then it outweighs my bank account statement. It outweighs the stock market news. It outweighs my job situation. It outweighs all of those things when they're good and when they're bad. And so we can, when things are good, we can be incredibly generous. We can give things away without fear of the future. And when things are bad, we can get through those hard times because we know what is and what will be.
that's great. And a great one to end on. Where are we going next Sunday? I know we're out of this series, right? And
Yeah.
into our annual recap and kind of going over I guess it'll be the last installment of the annual theme sermon series. So what do you
Yeah.
think that's going to look like?
Yeah, so one last sanctified, purified for a purpose lesson, and really talking about this idea of, are we living the life we're saved to live? Are we living the life that we're saved to live? And we're going to read from Second Peter, and Second Peter is all about false teachers. And I think that what was true in the first century is true today, that there are false teachers, whether they are formally in a formal position, a false teacher or a teacher at all. Maybe they're just friends. Maybe they're just, people on social media, but there are people around us who are giving us really bad advice and instruction that are not helping us to answer that question. Am
Hmm.
I living the life that I'm saved to live? They're not helping us to answer that in a good way, in a true way. And so they're making us feel very comfortable being disobedient, being rebellious to the good news of Jesus. And so I really want us to take a sober look at our lives and ask ourselves seriously, am I living the life that I was saved to live? Jesus saved me to live a particular kind of life, a holy life, a spotless life, a blameless life. These are big words. This is a big idea.
Yeah.
The good news sets us free to live a new and different kind of life. Seriously, am I living that life that I was saved to live?
That I cut a question here at the end, and I'm glad I did because it sounds like we're going to get into it next week about what does that look like to be completely committed and recommitted to King Jesus and a blameless life and living kingdom now and that sort of thing. We have some of these little sanctified, purified for a purpose bracelets, and I set out. You've got one buried deep down in there in your sweater there. I've got one on. I set out. I had extras, and we did not give all of them away at our starting point class, and so I set out. Probably I ordered too many, but I set out probably like 200 of them in the youth center and at our connection center desk. And I did that on like a Thursday and they were all gone. So that was cool.
Good,
I was glad
good.
everybody snagged them up and got them. So maybe we can kind of carry this theme into literally carry it on our wrist into the next year and excited to see where we're going next Sunday and next year. It's going to be great. Wes, Merry Christmas to you and yours. I hope you have a great one. And to everybody listening and or watching, I hope that you have a Merry Christmas. Thanks for joining us again. As always, we hope that you will listen to next week's sermon and send us your comments and questions.
Thanks so much for listening to PS, the Post Sermon Podcast. To find out more about this podcast or about the Church of Christ on McDermott Road, you can visit our website at ccmcdermott.org/PS. If this has been an encouragement to you, we also hope you will rate and review the show wherever you're listening, as well as share it with a friend, because we believe sermons are not just for Sunday, but for our whole week and our whole life.